So our presenter tonight is Dr. Donglai Gong, Associate Professor at VIMS in the Physical Sciences Department. He received his PhD from Rutgers University in oceanography, and now his research focuses on improving our understanding of the physical processes that drive transport and mixing in coastal oceans at mid and high latitudes. A fun fact about Donglai is that he loves to sail. He started to learn sailing in graduate school on the Charles River and made many great friends on the water. It's an activity that brought him peace in the days and months right after 9/11. It also brought him much joy and satisfaction when out with students and to have a chance to teach them about the ocean. He has a dream of using fast, modern sailing research vessels equipped with cutting-edge sensor technologies and autonomous systems to explore and study the world's oceans in a completely carbon neutral way. All right, Dr. Gong.
Thank you, Candace. I'm going to share my screen now. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me for this after-hour series. And tonight, I want to share with you some of my research experience and some of the research results we have that we did in the Arctic. It's one of my study focus regions, and it's a beautiful place. And I've been up there a number of times since when I was a postdoc about 10 years ago. A lot of today's presentations from one project which just took place last year. It's called the Northwest Passage Project, and that was in collaboration with a number of partners. It was funded by the National Science Foundation and the Heinz Simons Foundation. It was in collaboration with the Inner Space Center at University of Rhode Island, and I had collaborators from Oceans and Fisheries Canada, and that was part of the expedition was sponsored by Blue Robotics as well. So I would like to acknowledge all my collaborators here. So today we're going to focus on the topic of observing the changing Arctic Ocean. So first of all, I want to just list the lessons that I hope you can take away from today's presentation, and I will revisit them at later points. But we'll start off with these 4 points. The first is that the Arctic has its own memory of Earth's past and present. And there's a lot that we don't know and that we're still learning. Also, the people that's most impacted by the changing Arctic, that includes the indigenous people living up in the high Arctic, as well as the young people today, who will be impacted by future climate more than some of the older folks. I'm not too old, but they're definitely next generation is already here. And they will be experiencing some of the changes that we're observing today and in a much greater degree. So they need to assume stewardship of the Arctic. And many of the young people are ready today. Thirdly, what happens in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic. And this is part of the reason why we study that. It's a precursor to a lot of things that might happen down the line at lower latitude. When we talk about climate change and warming, it is warming faster at a faster rate up in the Arctic, and what's happening there is starting to impact us here in the lower latitudes. And lastly, because of all this, we need to do more to observe and study the Arctic. And now, if it's time allowed, I'll mention a bit of new technologies that we're bringing to bear to study the Arctic in a more cost-effective, as well as allow us to study in a more efficient way. A lot of these pictures you see today in the background of slides were taken by me during this expedition, and specifically this is one of my favorite as we were on an ice floe doing during an ROV survey. So let's talk about the past a little bit. Memories from the past, which we call the old Arctic. And by old Arctic, we mean essentially an icy Arctic that's almost perennially ice covered. The summer ice extent is of course much smaller than the wintertime ice extent, but it is always ice covered. And this has been the case for pretty much the past two plus million years. And if you look at this data record for the past 1,500 years, and you see that the estimated sea ice extent in Arctic has ranged from about 9 million square kilometers to about 11 million square kilometers. This is over 1,500 years. It's relatively stable. As we approach more modern times in the 1900s, you can see that that has changed. So at the beginning of that change, humans started to truly explore the Arctic and go into the Arctic Ocean. You might be familiar with the Franklin expedition took place in the 19th century, which ended in tragedy. That's what the bottom picture is depicting. And also the successful expeditions, the first time when Raoul Amundsen sailed through the Northwest Passage in the beginning of the 20th century. And unlike the early expedition, he sailed on a much smaller vessel. It was nimbler, and he also took his time. He spent time there to learn from the indigenous people, and utilizing that indigenous knowledge helped him to be successful. And that alludes to some of the things and lessons I want to discuss later. In that upper right picture is his ship, and you can see the giant iceberg in the background. So here's I love this picture. It's showing that even back then, that this collaboration between the Inuit, the meeting of the indigenous people who have lived there for a long time, versus essentially scientists from the West coming north to study and to learn about this environment and teaching each other and meeting and learning from each other. It was a very successful expedition as a result of that. So how do we learn, how do we obtain data from 1500 years ago? That's not something that we don't have satellite, for example, beyond 1979 much. That was the first time when we have consistent, persistent global satellite coverage. So we use more natural memory markers. In this case, ice cores and tree rings. And the photos on the right illustrate examples of how we obtain these ice cores from these glaciers and lakes, as well as tree rings collected from old trees in the high Arctic. And this is a map showing where some of these records are obtained for that time series plot I showed you on the previous figure. And by using all these records, compile them together, we have some idea of what the ice was like in the past. Now let's move to the present. Now we have satellite observations, and this is since the beginning of 1979. And this is what we consider the new Arctic era, when the ice is just rapidly melting, and we're essentially in a different regime. In 1984, this was the summertime ice extent for that year. And this is pretty much a representative of the average from early 80s to 2010s. Given this average, it is still much lower than it is significantly lower than what we have been observing in the past 1,000+ years. However, it's not. I mean, it's not exceptional. Jumping ahead to 2012, this was September 2012. And as you can see, if I were to extend this plot all the way down to where this will represent, will be all the way down here. And this was what the historically low summertime ice cover in the Arctic. Almost over half of the sea ice is gone during this summer. And the whole eastern passage is entirely open. So is this. This is the Northeast Passage, and this is the Northwest Passage that's also open. So this would, along with 2007, which was the previous record, and 2012, and more recent years, although we have not hit that minimum again, we have gotten lower and lower and consistently low for the past few years. So this is the trend that's setting up our study. This is today. This is 2020. This is the current sea ice coverage. It hasn't hit minimum yet. Usually hits minimum in September, mid-September. Here's the figure on the right shows us essentially what is the ice extent measurement going from the early from April down to today. And that dotted green line, I want to point out, that is 2012. That is the minimum. The blue line is this year. So at different times of the year, it is below, significantly below the average. And right now, who knows? We may or may not exceed that minimum. There's been several years where they were approaching that record low, and that all has happened in the past 10 years or so. This is another way to think about this is looking at the volume of ice instead of just the area of ice. And when we look at the volume of ice over the past 40 years or so, you think of this plot like a clock going from 1979 and then goes all the way to today. As you go to the present time, the radius of this line indicate how much ice there is. So it's spiraling toward zero. That means the volume of ice is getting smaller and smaller. So it doesn't take a lot to imagine how many more years it might before this spiral all the way down to zero for that summertime, which is that black line. And I'm showing this to set up the dramatic nature of change up in the Arctic and why it is so important that we understand what's driving those change and what's happening today so that we can better understand and predict what's going to happen in the future. In the previous figure, I showed the overall ice map for the whole Arctic, and it looks pretty smooth. But when you really go over these ice and look at on scale of, if you were to stand on a tall building and look down in the Arctic sea ice, might be something that you see. This was taken with a drone, and you see patches of broken ice. Some of our large ice flows, others are small ice flows. Some of our old ice, others are new ice. They're all, and then there's a lot of exposure to the water below and a lot of melting happening. So all of this particular piece of ice flow is being crunched up, it's being broken apart, and very likely next year this was taken in 2019. So it's very unlikely in the following year that all of this still exists. The process of how ice break up, how ice move out of the Arctic, and how and what's driving that. There are many ways and many pathways by which that can happen, but once it does melt, it's very hard for the older, thicker ice to come back. One thing I just want to briefly mention, but not go into detail today, was glacier on land. And the part that's most relevant for us in the Arctic region is the Greenland glacier. And essentially, these are glaciers that's not in the ocean. And if they melt, it will directly contribute to sea level rise. And we are in one of the regions where the sea level is rising the fastest. So this is the Greenland Greenland ice melt shown 2012, which is the yellow line, and 2020 showing the blue line. And as you can see, they're both above the average. So I'll move a little faster, running a little short on time. So why does ice matter? Ice drives a variety of ocean processes, including the physical and the biological. Many species in the Arctic, including polar bears and the marine mammals, rely on ice, and many of the plankton rely on ice to have their life cycle. And without the ice there, that life cycle is disrupted. Polar bear cannot feed, and in turn, they'll ultimately impact humans who live in the Arctic region. The heat from the sun enters the ocean, gets trapped much easier than when it's reflected off the ice, because ice has a much higher reflectivity, and that in turn can heat up the ocean and retain that heat and eventually melt more ice. So that's what is known as a positive feedback loop. So this Northwest Passage project, with NPP for short, has the objective to explore this changing Arctic and to engage in diverse audiences through real-time interactions from the sea. And to collect physical and biological and geochemical data in this critical region of Canadian Arctic archipelago that connects the Arctic Ocean with the Atlantic Ocean. And to engage and to exchange knowledge with the indigenous people of the Arctic and to share our experience with the public, like I'm doing right now. And finally, as part of all this, a film, a documentary film called Frozen Obsession has been produced, and I'll show you a trailer at the very end of this that captures our experience and the change that's happening. So here's the ship that we were on last year. The Odin is a Swedish heavy icebreaker. And here's our cruise plan. We departed from Thule, Greenland, and crossed Baffin Bay. And this is entering the Canadian Arctic archipelago. And this is Lancaster Sound. This is one of Canada's new marine reserves. We did all these sections. Wherever there's a red dot indicate the location of what is known as a hydrographic cast. And I'll show you some of the data from those measurements. And the blue line indicates the cruise path that we did. So why do we need an icebreaker if the Arctic sea ice is melting, you might ask? And I just want to show you a quick video clip of what the ship was going through. So even though the ice was melting, it was still very quick. All of the hazards of traveling into this Arctic region, a lot of cruise ships are starting to take passengers up there. We were in an expedition in 2018 on a different vessel, and that vessel actually ran aground to avoid ice. So it is not an easy place to access, and can be quite dangerous for people who really don't live and work there for a long period of time. So I'll move on to the scientific instruments aboard the Odin that we used. This is our main instrument. It's called a CTD, stands for conductivity, temperature, and depth. And essentially, that's that sensor right here on the bottom. Around it are these bottles called Niskin bottles, allow us to collect water samples from different depths of the ocean. And then when it's brought on board, people can collect that sample and analyze what's in those, from, both biologically and chemically. And there's also these yellow things that are called acoustic Doppler current profilers that allow us to send sound into the ocean and measure how fast is the water moving relative to this platform. And here's the chief scientist for the cruise, Bryce Luce. He's at University of Rhode Island. So here's a picture of how when this instrument is deployed off the bow of the ship. We have this line essentially that's always connected to this and lowers to the bottom of the ocean, and then comes back up. Once it comes up, we place on this plate, on this crate, and then we will just manually push it back into the room where we're going to collect the water samples. And we'll do this repeatedly again at each station. In the meantime, there was also a significant component of sharing our cruise and our science and our research live from the Arctic. And this was the first time where there was live broadcast from the Arctic. And this was hosted by the Inner Space Center, involving a lot of undergraduate students who are part of this cruise. This is Holly Morin, who is leading all this effort. So we had a production team on the ship. This is essentially the back room. And you can learn more about all of this at the Northwest Passage project website. It's simply northwestpassage.org. A lot of content has been archived in case you're curious. I think some of them are quite fun in this remote learning environment. So good resources. So back to the science. As we have that CTD instrument in the water, all the scientists are gathered around this screen and looking at the data. It's like, what is coming back? What do we see? And when it's coming back, we haul it onto this board, put it into the room, and this is where the students get to sample. And this will they go to work, and yeah. So while we're doing the sampling, we are surrounded by just amazing natural beauty. I'll just flip through a few of the scenes that we see every other day or so as we go through this amazing landscape. And of course, we did see some polar bears. This is one of the polar bears I saw. You can see one right there. It's quite far away. They tend to keep their distance. And the sunset is quite amazing because there's really, the sun really doesn't set. It's 24 hours sunlight during the summertime, and this is what you see probably at 2 a.m. in the morning. So here's some of the data that we collected from these hydrographic sections, and these lines, contours indicate the density layers of the ocean. The color indicate how salty the water is. For example, the blue indicate the fresh water on top, indicate ice melt, and then the yellow line region indicate, the green region indicate the saltier waters. And you can put those together and you can say, okay, based on what the temperature and the salinity of the water is, you can identify the different types of water coming from either from the Atlantic Ocean, or is it coming from the Arctic ice or sea ice melt, or is it formed during the winter time? So this is type of data and type of insight that hydrographic measurement can tell us. Another thing we did was using remotely operated vehicles. This was a system that was lent to us by Blue Robotics, and students really took to it, and we took it onto ice floe and placed it under the ice. This is our, so this is both graduate and undergraduate students were involved in this, and here in the water with us, joining for a selfie. And Gibby, who is one of the Inuk that joined us for the cruise, is demonstrating some of his techniques. So here's what the ROV sees from the bottom of the ice floe. And you can see the different textures of sea ice. And we access the site actually via helicopter from the ship. And then we fly back to the ship, and the ship will just steam along as we do our survey, and then we catch up to them afterwards. So this is our team. Another very significant finding during this cruise was that, so this is this part was led by Bryce Luce. They dug ice cores from these ice flows, and then they melted them, and they found significant amount of microplastics in the sea ice. And this was quite a sobering and shocking find, but it's quite prevalent. And there's been more studies showing that there's significant plastic pollution. It's not because of directly people dumping plastics up there, but it's been transported by the ocean and the air, and it's now ending up in some of these very apparently pristine environment, but when you look up close at the microscopic level, it is not. So that relates to the impact of changing Arctic on the indigenous people. And so we were up in the Canadian Arctic where the Inuits live up there, and they really rely on the land for both transportation as well as for food. And their home are also being impacted from coastal erosions as sea ice retreat, more ocean exposed, and when storms come through, the waves become bigger and they erode away their coastline and directly impacting their homes. So as part of to understand their lives and understand what scientists and science can do to help them, the people who live up there, there's this organization called IKAARVIK, which stands for Barriers to Bridges. So going from burying understanding to bridging our knowledge and helping both of us, both in the sense of the people who live out there as well as the scientists, to better work and better understand this changing environment. So here's a group of IKAARVIK students and scientists coming on board Odin, and we share our books with them, and they will live correct us, fact check to say, well, we have seen more than that, or we can see a different type of birds. And it was quite engaging just in that brief time frame to see what our books teach us and what their experience show. And they also took time to explain to us what does it mean to be an Inuit, what does it mean to live up there, and how they envision their future. So just more experience of sharing with our experience with each other. I'm not going to show this video, but since we're running out of time, but But it is a video that you can find on the internet. I will encourage you to search IKAARVIK, and this explains to them, to the audience, why it matters so much for the young people up there to really
living
embrace
off the
their
land
traditional knowledge
and learning how to survive in the
their
conditions
background,
that
and
we
at the
have
same
lived in
time
for thousands of
working
years
with Western
is just so important
science
to keep going.
to really gain an
I
understanding.
mean, I can call this place home.
So we visited the Pond Inlet, which is an Inuit community, and had a very brief glimpse of what life is like up there, and met some of the local people, and that was very appreciated. These are two of the Inuits who worked with us during the expedition, and they were here for the whole cruise. This is Gibby and Mia. Gibby is from Johaven, and then Mia was from Cambridge Bay. And they were amazing people to work with, and they taught us so much about their culture. So what happens in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic. And why is that? What does it matter? When you look at it from a global perspective, and here's think about looking at air temperature, the difference between the decade of 2010s versus the decade of the 1980s. And you can see just within that time frame of 30 some years, there's huge amount of warming up in the Arctic, and that's also relating to the warming down on the continents in the lower 48. But the magnitude of that is much warmer. At the same time, the ocean also warms, and this is the anomaly. Same time period difference from 2000 in the 2010s to the 1980s, and you can see that the ocean has warmed. The warming ocean has led to a change in our coastal ocean temperature. This is right off our coast in the East Coast, and over the past 40 years, there's been warming of a couple degrees. So, so this will impact the ecosystem, the fish that live in this region, and some of the colder water species will migrate north if they can, and we might get more tropical species. And there'll be an impact on the fisheries and the food security for a lot of people who are living in the coastal region. Not to mention we have the sea level rise issue. So what does the new Arctic mean for all of us? To be honest, I don't have all the answer. I don't have really an answer for this, but I want to bring out some points for you to think about, and this is something that we all need to pay attention to going forward, as the impact of the warming Arctic is going to be felt locally and as well as in the lower 48 and beyond. So the Arctic is on track to be seasonally ice-free by mid-21st century, or even earlier. One of the latest study even quoted 2035. And the last time this happened on Earth was 3 million years ago, and human didn't exist back then. Homo sapien has only been on Earth for less than 300,000 years. So we really don't know what really the impact of this change will be on the marine ecosystem and terrestrial ecosystem and on humanity. So human civilizations over the past few thousand years have thrived on relatively stable and favorable climate. So will that change? And so the solution to that will lie into our knowledge and what we do today. So and the need, so this drives the need for polar ocean and climate research, and this is greater than ever before. And so to predict the future, we need to understand the past and the present, and we need to observe the polar ocean more, faster, and better and cheaper ways. So if I have, let's take 1 minute to show you some of the technologies that we're bringing to bear for essentially more effective and more pervasive observation in these polar environments. And these are essentially our autonomous robotic systems that allow us to be there even when humans cannot effectively, or we can be there, we can be present in the ocean and observe it in for much longer duration in much diverse environment. So in these systems, you can communicate, collect data from under the ice, under the ocean, and when they have a chance, they come to the surface, send the data back. We have a real-time view of what the ocean is doing. So here's my vision for what that may involve in the future. You have these platforms technologies, which relatively has relatively steep learning curve at the moment, but there's no reason technologically in the next 5 to 10 years or so, for example, where the technology becomes very accessible and to the point where children or students from around the world can ask questions and task their own fleet of robotic systems to explore and to learn. And I think that will be very exciting from both education and research perspectives. And these are the people who will be most impacted by the changes up in the Arctic in the long term. So the last slide here, the science slide, is basically here's we do have these autonomous underwater vehicles in the water today. Actually, some of them were right near where Hurricane Laura just went through and collecting data underneath the hurricane. And we at VIMS, we even have one glider right now off the Virginia coast collecting data about the ocean. I'll just show you this frozen obsession trailer.
We've entered into this era called the New Arctic. Ice cover retreats for much longer of the year. So we have the opportunity to come in and characterize this area, which has gone through quite a tremendous change in the last 5 to 10 years.
The Arctic, mysterious, distant, isolated. Join the Northwest Passage Project as scientists and students venture into the Canadian Arctic archipelago, where few have gone before.
This is like huge, you know, nobody gets to do this, you know, and go on like a research expedition as an undergrad.
This pristine environment is inhabited by unique wildlife that rely on ice to survive. Now a warming climate is profoundly changing this frozen world.
We didn't expect this. It was completely shocking.
If we don't capture this today, then 10, 20, or 50 years from now, nobody will remember this. This will be all gone.
The more we advocate about Arctic research and preservation, I think the more people open their eyes and realize that something has to be done or else it's going to be irreversible.
For centuries, sailors were obsessed to find a path across the frozen Arctic. Now, scientists are obsessed to understand a melting Arctic and how these changes will affect us all. Coming to your warming world soon.
I just want to acknowledge the individuals who made my study of the Arctic possible, and David Clark was one of the filmmaker who initially invited me to be a part of this expedition. Gail Scowcroft was the project scientist for this whole project. And of course, my family, who without their support, none of my work would be possible, and especially my wife, who's a superwoman. And thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Donglai. We do have a couple of questions. I just want to remind everyone, type the questions down in the Q&A feature at the bottom for Dr. Gong. That was very insightful. Thank you so much. And everyone loves charismatic megafauna, so always good to see those. So our first question is, can the sea ice recover, or is the feedback loop at the point of no return?
That's a great question, whether the sea ice can recover or not. I think scientists have run different types of models to see, by changing our emission level today, how long will that make a difference? When will that start to make a difference? And I think there is definitely a big difference between, let's say, if we go to we stop emitting all greenhouse gas, which is very unlikely to happen right now. But that's going to lead to there's still some inertia. It's going to see more sea ice is going to melt, but it's not going to reach the point where is going to be completely gone, I think, and totally irreversible. However, if we do continue business as usual and don't mitigate, then we'll be entering an environment where very likely we'll reach that point of no return. And when that, the key question is, when does that happen? And we don't know exactly, but sometimes within this century, we think. Great question.
All right. So does the increasing effects of ocean acidity prevent new ice from forming in the Arctic?
So the ocean acidification has a, it's an impact, it mainly impacts the, first of all, the Arctic Ocean has a, is one of the places where it's acidifying, and the cold temperature makes that ocean acidification effect more dramatic. And the impact is mainly on the marine organisms, the calcium-based calcareous organisms that relies on a specific pH range for them to form their shells, for example, to grow. But if you lower the pH, increase the acidity enough, then the shell essentially get eaten away, essentially by the water, and they can't grow. So that's the main concern for the fisheries and the life. I don't think it has a huge impact on the sea ice formation process itself.
All right. Is sea ice releasing greenhouse gas accelerating warming and melting?
Is sea ice releasing greenhouse gas? The amount of greenhouse gas stored in sea ice, I mean, of course, whenever sea ice form is taking what is in the atmosphere, and when it melts, is releasing back to the atmosphere. So the amount of gas total involved in that process is relatively small compared to the overall amount of greenhouse gas that humans are releasing, the overall amount that's in the atmosphere or even in the ocean. So just looking at the sea ice itself, it doesn't have a, it might have, the annual cycle might have some impact, but in terms of overall longer term trend, I think the impact's relatively small. But with the caveat to say that I'm not a sea ice scientist, so I'm not 100% sure of my answer. So just, that's based on my own understanding.
Okay. When you were out on the ice, it looked as though you were near some large fissures in the ice. How hazardous was it for you to be there?
So when we're on the ship, we're very safe because this is a heavy icebreaker, and it's designed to be in thick sea ice environment and can handle the stress. However, when we were going onto the sea ice to sample, then definitely is very treacherous and requires to pick a secure location and walk around on the ice floe in a very careful fashion. So the two helicopters you see right here did a lot of moving us around from the vessel to the land, from vessel to ice floes. When we were on the ice floe doing the ROV deployment, we had Gibby with us, who's a Inuk, and he was able to show us how they move around on sea ice to make sure that it's secure. So essentially, that they stick, and as each step they take, that's on a piece of ice floe, they're unfamiliar, they'll just poke all around the body to make sure there's no weak part, and that's how they take one step at a time to make sure that they're on a safe, secure region. So we follow that. We learned that, and we follow that same procedure as we moved around on the ice floe.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. So how is the Arctic coast responding to lower ice extent? Are there species colonizing the coastal Arctic from the south?
Wait, can you repeat that question again, please?
Yes. How is the Arctic coast responding to lower ice extent? Are there species colonizing the coastal Arctic from the south? Are there species moving north?
I see. So I think there are multiple levels of impact The one I alluded to, I mentioned in the presentation, was that when sea ice goes away, the ocean becomes more energetic, because when the wind blows, sea ice can block wind when it's present, but when it's not present, it can generate a lot of waves in the ocean. And these larger waves can eat away at these relatively soft coastlines. A lot of them are rich in organic matter, but really not strong. When they used to be cold and it's frozen in, that can handle they can handle that stress from the waves. But when, again, the warming temperature allowed essentially the coastline to become all mushy, and that allowed them to erode away very quickly. I mean, tens of feet a year at some places. Another thing is, with the warming Arctic, you might hear news of, for example, temperature in the summertime Siberia reaching the 90s. Of course, that's going to have a significant impact on the life forms, the ecosystem there. Again, I'm not a biologist, but I definitely imagine that the warmer species are starting to, like grass, and starting to colonize more and more of the higher Arctic.
So we have a few people asking, is Frozen Obsession out now, and where can it be viewed? When is it coming out, and where can they view it?
So Frozen Obsession, the feature film is completed. It's not yet released. It was going to be released this spring, but because of COVID, they postponed the release of the film. And I don't have a specific date, but my best knowledge is that I think they want to wait until they can do a proper release and get this whole team of students, undergraduates and graduate students from around the country, and get them all together to be part of this film premiere. And I don't know when that's going to happen, but hopefully within the next 6 to 12 months.
So for those looking for updates on this, so should they follow you on social media, or how should they kind of keep tabs on when it will be?
Sure, that's one way. You can also follow so there's the Northwest Passage project.org, the website, as well as the Inner Space Center at URI. I'm sure we'll also announce all this, and you're welcome to follow me as well. And if when the film's released, we'll definitely let everyone know. Perfect. And thank you for your interest in that.
Yeah, we'll also share in eTidings, our newsletter that we send out, so you can keep an eye there. Yep. The VIMS website, but definitely if you want direct line communication to the scientists, their social medias are good to go, and the direct sites are always great. And so let's see, we have a couple of questions about undergrad research. Do you have any advice for those interested in getting involved in Arctic research? And if graduate or undergraduates would like to have this research opportunity, could they contact you? What's sort of their process to help the Arctic?
Okay, that's a great question, and I'm really excited to hear that a lot of undergrads are interested in pursuing research in Arctic and learning more about it. So there are many ways to join this Arctic research community. There's no one way, and I think the most important thing as an undergrad is to seek out the people and the research projects that seems the most interesting to you, and really try to learn as much as you can, and contact the people who are working on them. Now, scientists are a busy bunch, and some of them are sometimes are not very good at responsive emails. And here's my biggest advice: do not let any email unresponded discourage you in any way from pursuing your passion in your career. Like, you should not be stopped by non-responsive people or lack of email response or untimely response. And I'm guilty of that myself sometimes. But if you are persistent and you show that enthusiasm, and and there's a lot of things you can learn online without going up there right now to get you a basic set of understanding and knowledge, allow you to communicate with scientists who are already working up there. And when people see that you have insightful insights and comments about their work, and they think that you can be then you'd be much more likely to be part of a research program and graduate program as well. So just stay enthusiastic and be persistent and don't give up at all easily.
Very good advice. We have a couple of questions about gliders. So someone wants to know, is that a glider behind you?
Yes, I tried hard to position myself in the lab so that this glider named Sylvia is right behind me. We just actually received her this week after she was being upgraded and serviced, and yes, so I have Sylvia behind me.
So someone wants to know how long ROVs can remain in the ocean and how much maintenance they require.
Okay, so that depends. So not all gliders are the same. Some of them are a bit moodier than others, and others has a harder life than others. And so for our systems, we have had our two, Amelia and Sylvia, our two gliders since 2013 and 14. And this year they got major, essentially midlife upgrade and service. So they're good to go for at least another similar amount of time. And one of the major upgrades they got was these rechargeable battery packs inside. With this, then essentially the glider, I think, we can turn them around much faster. They can be reused without opening up, reballasting, which is a lot of effort. And single-use batteries is kind of wasteful. So I'm really quite excited about that specific upgrade for our system right here. But if you want the ultimate endurance and range, you just want the glider to be out there for as long as possible, then you have to go to these lithium primary batteries. And the best ones if you pack as much batteries in there as possible and you fly your glider in a very energy efficient way, you can be out in the ocean for a year or more.
Oh, wow. We have a couple of more science gauge questions.
Sure.
Are measurements of the ocean currents in the Arctic being compiled? And if so, have any trends been noticed in this era of melting, i.e. slowing down, speeding up, or changing paths?
Yeah, great question. So there are measurements of the ocean currents, and there are also measurements of the ocean properties. And they're not two completely separate things. Oftentimes, when there's a lack of direct measurement of ocean currents, which is one of the harder measurements to make compared to just how warm or cold the water is. So by looking at the ocean properties, if you do like what we did, a section along a flow pathway, then based on certain dynamical relationships, you can back out the flow information. So we try to do that more and as much as possible. And whenever people go up there with a research vessel, there's some standard transects, which a lot of different research groups agree that they're important to understand how the ocean current is doing, and whoever's up there, they'll just complete them. And one of the names, so the names for them that's called Distributed Biological Observatories, DBO lines, and we have a number of them along Alaska into Canada. But in other regions like Fram Strait, the Europeans have done persistent measurements of the outflow from the Arctic, and also in Davis Strait, down by between Greenland and Canada. Now there's persistent observations, and National Science Foundation has funded a number of studies called OSNAP, which is a set of arrays and cruises that covers the entire North Atlantic, stretching from U.S. all the way to Europe, and that look at the flow coming into and out of flow into and out of the Arctic or into the Atlantic, depending on perspective, and that can tell us something about global overturning circulation. So yes, we try to do that whenever possible.
Awesome. Are there any plans for another cruise like this one, or is it an ongoing project, or was it just a one shoot, one cruise event?
So this project was funded for one field season, even though we had several tries. I'm not going to too much detail on them, but this was our last year was the successful field season, and it made up for all the challenges we had earlier. Scientists are always writing more proposals, and developing new ideas and how to better understand the Arctic system. So there will be new projects. Maybe it's not on paper yet today, but certainly it's probably in someone's yet, well, someone might have conceived already and they just need to lay it down and get it funded. So in the coming decades, I'm sure there'll be a lot of cruises going up there. Some of them might involve undergraduates just like this cruises. And some of them may not just focus on the Arctic, but also Antarctic, for example.
Awesome. So I just have a few more questions for you. So
Sure. How
cold is it there? What's the air temperature like?
Okay, good question. So actually, we were out there between mid-July to early August, and the temperature was really never much below freezing. When we toured Greenland, it was in 50s, and during the expedition, it was routinely in the 40s and sometimes in the 50s. And it was kind of surreal in a way at times where we're surrounded by sea ice and you're going to ice field. Yet when you step outside, it doesn't feel cold. So at that temperature, all the ice around you that you see, your eye tell you that it should be cold, but your body tell you it's really not that cold. And then you know that they're all melting. So that's kind of like a visceral disconnect, so to speak, between what we think the Arctic should be versus how we're feeling experiencing it up there.
That's really interesting. Is there anything we can do as a community to help decrease our impact? And then conversely to that, is there anything I would say could they do to help the research even?
Short answer is definitely. To me, I think our everyday action, what we envision our own carbon footprint, for example, is to be in the next 5 to 10 years, and how we want to achieve that, having a plan to achieve that on our individual or family or institutional level. I think a lot of the tools and resources and technologies there for us today now to almost go carbon neutral in the next, especially as we retire older technologies that's carbon intensive with newer technologies that's more low carbon. I think if we all pay attention to what we do today and how we plan for our own future in terms of how we function within our community, and I think those concrete steps will definitely help. And that's essentially, at the end of the day, what's going to make a difference. And to help with this whole, not just research, but just help with the whole, the Arctic in general, as a natural as well as a man-made environment, is to support when there's a need to study it, when there's a need to be up there, or when there's a need to communicate and share, then support those initiatives. And that sometimes comes down to funding, other times might come down to access opportunities, and just paying attention, like you are now, about changes happening and learning constantly.
Yes. So we have a lot of thank yous. They said it was, thank you for a very engaging after hours. It was so cool. We do have a last question. Will the webinar be shareable? Yes. So this will be edited and put on our after hours on our website, vims.edu. And also we have a YouTube account. So if you haven't checked out our YouTube, go over there. You can, subscribe to get notified when we post new videos. And that's our news and media team doing a great job with that. Go to our Facebook, all the great resources Donglai mentioned earlier, and feel free to share this on social media. And this is possible because we have support. So thank you, Dr. Gong, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight, because this is why we do it. So thank you all so much. This has been awesome.
Thank you, everyone. I really enjoyed this. Take care.
Have a great night.